Hello everyone, just me coming to you today. My good friend Avi is out of town for work for the next week or two, so I'm just here to go over some stuff. So yeah, I finally got around to having a read of the Living Rules policy put out by Factory Fortress about 10 days ago now, at time of recording. And it's made me now want to go over this and then follow that up with going over the changes between 1.6.3 and the current edition, along with some just commentary on some of these changes. So yeah, let's jump to it. First of all, we'll have a quick run over this rule, the Living Rules policy, if you haven't had a chance to look at that yet. So yeah, errata updates as needed. So that even includes your FAQs and such. So they do talk about that further down, but errata and FAQs are somewhat interchangeable in my mind. They're going to be when needed to fix things that's like, oh wait, this is broken, and we need to give. They want to give us an answer straight away. I'm a little disappointed we haven't seen some more of that yet, but we will get to that as we work through this a bit further. So the main bit to take away from this policy is the rules update twice a year. And those changes boil down to two categories: changes for clarity to make the rules easier to understand and follow, and changes for balance. I imagine all of the balance will be going into more points and ducats and glory point cost for items, and maybe some tweaks of rules where things are really overperforming. And at the moment, though, changes just for clarity are where I think the rules really need the most help. The rules commentary, now, this is something I love the idea of, and some rule books will actually have the rules commentaries baked into the rule book in the side margins, where at the moment we have actual rules like the shooting into melee combat and such. I think that's the big one that's still left in the columns. A lot of them did get moved to being their own sections rather than side columns in moving to 1.0.1. But yeah, at the moment it doesn't exist. It does say that, yeah, in addition to the digital rules, you can download a set of rules commentaries from the rules page, but it's not there just yet. But I do look forward to when it's there. Printed rulebooks just talking about the fact that it's not going to be staying up to date. In the future, they will print more, and they will publish documents that should allow you to use your book and one document to get you one document in conjunction with your printed book to be able to have everything you need. And I hope they do that rather than you having to carry like 3 or 4 riders to be having it up to date. I now want to take the chance to have a run over some of the rules changes from 1.63 to 1.01. I know there was the 1.0 edition in the middle there, but I just like to pretend that one didn't happen, and it's just much easier because that's where the big changes occurred. So yeah, the first one I've got highlighted is just down here. So yeah, charge or fight. Fight was added. Previously, it was only charge was the only bit you looked at for making shooting attacks. So if you made a shooting attack with a non-assault weapon, you could then charge and so on, or vice versa. But yeah, they've now also added in fight, which is pretty big. Before, you could, as long as if you're already in combat, you could fight and then turn around and still shoot your weapon, where now you can't. Unless it has the assault keyword, of course. So that was a pretty big change, and the main problem it's caused is the Bow of Amulet and the Tormentor Chain are both weapons that you use for range and then either move you into base contact with the enemy model, in the case of the Bow of Amulet, or in the case of the Tormentor Chain, you're pulling someone to you, and they haven't got assault. So at the moment, after you use them, you're then not able to make a melee attack as well. In the case of the Bow of Amulet, it is interesting. Its wording has been stripped back and removed any wording that inferred that the intention of the weapon was to make a melee attack after making the ranged attack, which is a bit odd. So I'm wondering if was that an intentional change that the bow is no longer meant to be used to get you into melee combat and make an attack that turn, or not. So yeah, especially for the assassin, it does feel a bit weird that it would teleport across the table and then not get to make a melee attack that turn. It's an assassin. In my mind, it's meant to be very much you're meant to attack and then in the same turn get back to safety, like the Death Commander in Heretic Legion. Yeah, and the Tormentor chain as well. Like, yeah, you gotta pull them in and then wait a whole battle round now before you can actually make that follow-on melee attack. Like, if I was playing with someone that they wanted to make the melee attack after with either of these, wouldn't stop them. It does feel, to me, the intention of the weapon does still feel like you should be able to make a melee attack after using them. So yeah, I very much hope we get some clarity around that change. Next part is just all these diagrams out, which are very pretty, and I love them for being pretty, but as practical drawings to help people learn the game, they're not the most useful, because at the moment, there's no base. So this whole bit here is, yeah, missing the presumably 25mm base that should be on it. Let's just draw that a little better, about there. Because at the moment, it's not. It does talk about measured from the base of each model, but I really would like the idea of it had the base drawn in there as well. That way you can measure from the edge of the base across, and you're both showing and telling the correct way to do things. And next up in declaring charge. So at the moment, it's a little unclear because the big change to declaring a charge in this edition was that you can no longer make a action roll to try and charge someone you can't see. The issue I see arising is when I try to charge a model I can see, but there's an interposing model, and interposing model being a model within that I'm going to have to travel within 1 inch of to get to my intended target. But if I can't see that model, that's where the issue becomes, because if there's a model that I'm going to go within 1 inch of, I have to make them the target of my charge, and that's before I make the charge roll. So yeah, it's a bit awkward. It's a bit clunky at the moment. Like, I would never stop anyone I'm playing with from being able to make them the target and charge them instead, because otherwise being able to use a model to block a charge through this mechanic feels pretty rough. This is another one I would really like some clarity around. Multi-charge has been moved under the charge move rules, which makes sense consolidating that all into one. It's just it feels a little hidden away now, especially if you want to check the rules for it. There isn't anything that pulls you to this paragraph to make it clear that this one is talking about multi-charging. At least like the one above, climbing, jumping, and jumping down or moving through dangerous terrain, like that is the first part of the paragraph, so it makes it clear, the dot point, so that dot point is clearly about those items in regards to charging. So here I wish it would say for charging multiple enemies, because a model must stop as soon as it moves into base contact with the target, unless carrying on with its move allows it to stay in base contact with the target and finish within 1 inch of any other enemy model. So yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful there, but it's if you can effectively multi-charge, you first have to hit them. You have to come into base contact with the first model of the two or more that you want to charge, and then from there you can continue to use your movement to skirt around them to make the charge. Which, it's a little clunky, and the big thing to keep in mind is when a model is trying to go around another model's base, that movement is actually quite inefficient because you can't go through enemy model bases. So that's just something to keep in mind. If you're only just making, if you only have like a spare inch of movement, but then you have to go into base contact and start going around, that inch isn't going to go as far as if you were able to try and get to the optimal point to charge both of them. But yeah, at least it is here. It is quite well written, and it is pretty clear how to go about doing it. That said, if you do want a bit more clarification and some diagrams, the amazing community FAQ by A Troll in a Trench on their House of Wisdom page on there, has some very good diagrams. So if you're a little lost on that one, I definitely recommend checking that one out. Yes, now climbing and jumping. So there's a few bits here for me to I've highlighted to remind myself. So up first, the 1 inch high. So yeah, back in the 1.63 rules, when it talks about 1 inch high objects, it also says when moving over them, which does not cost movement. And it was in the train rule section back then. But yeah, it was very explicit. When you're going over a 1 inch or lower object, you don't have to pay the movement cost to go over it. So effectively you just measure horizontally and that's it. But now, without that wording there, it implies that you have to pay the movement to go over the 1-inch object. And how pedantic do you want to get with this? Like a whole bunch, like if you have 4 half-inch high objects you're going to move over, there you go, you've lost 2 inches of your 6 inches of movement. So yeah, I feel like this was an oversight and just something some wording they thought they could clean up in the rules. But if you now read it, rules as written, it actually becomes very awkward. And especially if you then take it of the assumption that no, it doesn't cost movement, but it's in the climbing section. So if you're not paying the movement to go over the 1-inch high thing, why would you be paying it to climb up a sheer surface, which down here in the climbing sheer surface section talks about measuring that. So yeah, at the moment I feel like this was just some tidy up of the wordings that they messed up. And once again, this is a rule that my play group has been playing with still, because none of us actually realized that it had changed. Yeah, so if we come down a little bit further, they do have an example used for jumping over gaps. And it's not amazing because once again, we haven't got the bases, it's a little bit hard to tell where the movements are happening. But up here in climbing and jumping, we don't have that, and that with some of the wording does leave it a little bit vague to me. Yeah, at this point, like my reading of these rules are like, because once you get within the 1 inch of the sheer surface, like a wall, you can say that you're going to attempt to climb up or down it. To do so, the model must have enough movement to clear the entire surface it is climbing, i.e. it cannot finish the move halfway up the wall. You must take a risky success roll for the model when it reaches the sheer surface. But yeah, reach of the sheer surface is within 1 inch. That's defined up here. If the risky roll is a success, you can move the model directly up or down so that that they are standing at the top or bottom of the sheer surface. So it's not talking about actually how to measure the sheer surface, but presumably you just measure from the lowest point to the highest point, or vice versa if you're climbing down, of course. But if you're only moving within 1 inch, do you still measure that horizontal distance? Because that's not the climb. I know this is getting a little bit rules lawyer pedantic, but I do wish there was an example here that clearly showed that you do measure the horizontal movement still. And then finally finishing off in this bit, actually before I talk about this bit, we'll just quickly talk about the jumping over gaps and in the official FAQ. So if you move 4 inches to get to here, and then it's going to cost you 2 inches to jump across this gap, you can make that jump. It is in the FAQ that as long as you have enough movement to clear the gap, you just place the model and you effectively get free movement to place the model on the other side. So whatever your base size is, you get that as free movement on the other side of the jump. Which I don't actually like for jumping over gaps. I think you should have to have enough movement to place at least half the model's base or more on the other side. And that kind of just the reason why half the base is just because that's in line with placing a model rules earlier in the rulebook. So yeah, I kind of wish that same logic was actually applied to climbing or jumping. So when you climb up the top, you only need enough movement to do any remaining horizontal movement to get to the surface to climb it, and the vertical or descent distance. And then place the model at the top, even if it doesn't have enough movement to place its base at the top. This just allows for your bigger models, like your 60mm bases in particular, a little bit more ease of moving around the battlefield. And, well, they are bigger, right? The base going at the top is representing that free movement, is showing it has an easier time climbing compared to a smaller guy who, is going to have a much harder time, or he's got further to climb compared to a war shrine, a desecrated saint, and so on. So yeah, I don't think I would want it to be I would only want it to be at the end of their movement, just so it's not too abusable. But yeah, I'd have to have a few games where playing on terrain that's really going to see this happen. But yeah, I like the idea of just making your bigger models feel like they are able to navigate the terrain easier because they're bigger. Otherwise, their size really does just at times feel more of a hindrance, which is fair enough. But they're bigger. I think climbing in that way should be easier. And part of the reason why I don't think of it as being too abusable is because you still have to make a climb test. And if you haven't gotten a skill to help you with that, it's not super reliable. So once again, talking about how these examples will be better with models on bases, I think you can even leave this Trench Pilgrim in here doing the actions, but then having a model with a base as a silhouette at the base here, at the top, and at the end, showing where you started measuring from, where you finished measuring, to make it really clear where the movement costs were. And that just to really clean up some of these questions. Like, interesting enough, like, so for this first one here, I presume the base was here. And then he climbed from the bottom. So these two, the 2-inch and the 3-inch, I think of like they were measured from the base, from front of the base to front of the base, and then this arrow here probably should be pointing to the top of it. And then, so that's it in that, and then, yeah, so that's 5 inches, 1 inch to place the base up the top because a Trench Pilgrim 25mm base is effectively 1 inch. So that gets you 6 inches of movement to climb to the top. And as in the example, he makes a dash move and jumps across. That said, because he's only showing 2-inch gap there, and that is roughly equal to the 2 inches down here, it is kind of showing that that is not movement being paid for. But yeah, like these examples are really very much feel like, we need to have examples, but we don't quite understand what the examples are meant to do in the rulebook. Flying. So flying at the moment is actually in a really weird spot because flying isn't really flying. It's more like you're on a hoverboard just above the ground. So as long as you don't stop on dangerous terrain, you ignore it. Difficult terrain, you do just ignore. You can finish on it. And impossible terrain is still it's a little unclear because impossible terrain is if it were open terrain. So, but what is like a wall is a physical thing that you can't move through. So I assume impossible terrain is more talking about things like lava and things that you don't get to make a dangerous terrain roll on. You just die. And I think they do talk about that further down. But right now I'm not too fussed. It doesn't attain to the point I'm making, which is at the moment, if I want to, if my Praetor is 3 inches from a sheer surface that wants to go up, and that sheer surface, say, is 3 inches high. At the moment, I would move him 3 inches up to the wall, and then I would automatically pass my climb test and go up. I don't get to measure from the point of his base to the corner, which would be 4.5-ish inches. I can't remember I'm not Pythagoras after all. But yeah, I can't measure the one longer side. I have to move the two shorter sides to be able to go up, which feels a bit weird. And what kind of backs me up a bit on this is you do not have to take a risky success roll to see if a model can climb or jump. So if it's going to jump, it's using the same rules as any other model would for jumping, but it just automatically passes the roll. And they can still fall, which makes sense, like, because most of the time when you're falling, it is because you have messed up. And, so you haven't messed up, you've been shot and you failed the roll to see if you fall or not. And at that point, like, you assume you're dazed, so you wouldn't be flying in that state either. So yeah, at the moment, you don't actually have to make the injury roll if the model falls. So at the moment, you actually ignore that anyway, which is pretty powerful. Yeah, so I can't, if I'm standing on one rooftop and want to go to another one, with my Predator as the example still, half his move is 4 inches, so that is the biggest gap he can fly across currently. He just automatically passes the roll. He does not have to, also no, he doesn't have to make the roll, but he can't go any further. So if he wants to go over a gap 6 inches, no way, Jose. The wings don't do much. They are just... Yeah, it does very much feel like hoverboards from Back to the Future, the behavior of flying at the moment. Yeah, so it feels, very... It's another one where, realistically, I think the section needs to be rewritten a bit, and this one definitely needs examples showing it. I think 40k still has issues with trying to make flying units. The rules for them make sense and be easy to use, so I can give them a bit of slack here. It's fair enough if they're having issues, because everyone else seems to as well. Up next, I want to have a quick look over the official FAQ, and just quickly go over what that's covering from this rule set. So yeah, in what order do you do blood and blessing markers? This is one I actually didn't fully click to until I read it here, and that's just, order of blood and blessing markers. I do find it interesting it's done by the initiative rather than by just you have to declare blood markers and whoever's using the blessing marker gets the final say. But at least there is a defined order in the rules, which is nice. Some of them here just, is move, charge, retreat, a single action. They are the same. Yeah, it defines it a little bit weirdly. It's like, but yeah, you can only do one of them. That's the main part to take away from that. Yeah, that's a bit of a weird case. I'm not sure why you'd want to retreat if you are unable to move. And then, rules question 4 is where that being placed on the other side of a gap being free, which is right at the end here. And their base on the other side of the gap being free. So I believe you don't even... In this example, the model is moving 3 inches and then jumping a gap of 3 inches, so there is no movement left. But the overall reading of this does imply being placed on the other side is actually always free, which seems a bit weird, but yeah, that'd be another one I'd actually like further clarification on. Because, it's saying something's free, but not being 100% clear if that's only if you don't have movement left. A little bit more clarification on shooting into combat is always nice. And something actually I did just remember is with shooting into combat, and I'm guessing I actually did have a highlight. I did. I just forgot I had this down here. When you're shooting into combat, if you're shooting at a enemy model and it's within 1 inch of, say, the dragon from Dragon Hunt, you don't actually have to randomize who you hit. Because at the moment is 1 inch of your model or models, which feels very weird. Like, I do think in the Dragon Hunt scenario, if I shoot at I should always be able to shoot at the dragon and guaranteedly hit it. The dragon is meant to be on a 120mm base or bigger, so the dragon relatively should be towering over everything else and quite large. But yeah, if I want to shoot an enemy in combat with the dragon, they're both tussling and moving around, so sure, I might miss them and hit the dragon instead. That's fair enough. The thing I'm shooting at is most likely nowhere near as big as the dragon. But yeah, at the moment, I can just shoot an enemy model in contact with the dragon and not have to worry about hitting my non-intended target. And of course, this then becomes very weird if you want to do team games. Really, if I'm going to be playing a team game, I'd be saying you have to randomize if there's anyone within 1 inch of your intended target. And continuing on, there are actually a few more things that I did highlight to go over. So yeah, determining range attack modifiers. The elevated position was moved from being a 2 inch requirement to a 3 inch requirement, which overall I do like, because there's a lot of terrain that is going to be 2 inches off the ground. It's just that because there's so much of it, it's very easy to get that +1 dice to hit, and going from being, especially if you're shooting at a target in the open but long range, that means you're still on flat dice to hit them. If they're in cover, you're at -1, but it just keeps especially if you're making your trenches, say 2.5 inches tall, which Adeptagon's doing, and I've been playing around with now since I read their pack, and I've been finding that's quite a good height for trenches. When someone's on a trench over the top of you, yes, it probably is. It's going to be easier, but I like the idea of trenches not giving you that big of an advantage, so it plays into that quite well. Yeah, and now you can be a bit. I feel like it's a bit easy to be more intentional where you're putting terrain on the board that's going to give the elevated position bonus. So yeah, multiple melee attacks got a bit of a change. Previously, each melee weapon you had got to make the melee attack action, where now all the weapons you have to attack at the same time, and it just counts as the one action. So you can't start your activation in combat with someone, take them out of action, and then charge someone else and take them out of action with your second melee attack. So yeah, I think that just as much as the game loves its explosive possibilities, this does just tone that back a little bit and gets rid of the real big edge cases. And particularly when that was combined with, say, Champion, that was particularly scary because you could make 2 attacks against one person, charge someone else, and still get to make 2 more melee attacks, assuming you had 2 melee weapons, and then Champion giving each of those attacks an additional attack. So yeah, Diving Charge, that was the big rule change in 1.0 that then got revert from 1.63 to 1.0. They got rid of the action roll to ignore taking the full damage or the full injury roll. And yeah, so because of the people complaining now that diving charges were too hard, they put back in you can make the risky success roll to avoid taking the injury roll. Was that a tongue twister or what? And now it almost feels a bit too easy because I could be jumping down 10 inches, say. I pass the risky success roll to make the jump down, and I then get to make my diving charge. Where if I was jumping down 10 inches, that would be up in 1.0 would have been a injury roll with +3 dice, which is pretty scary. Like +3 dice, that's going to give you a good chance of knocking out things even with -2 armor. So yeah, I think they swung back a little bit too far on this one. My compromise would be for every full 3 inches of height you drop down, you have a -1 dice to the injury roll. Even if otherwise jumping down, and this would include for non-diving charges, if you're jumping down up to 3 inches, you get a +1 dice to the jump roll, and then anything of 3 inches or greater after that starts giving you minus dice. So if you jump between 3 and 6 inches down, it's a flat roll. If you're going what is that? Then 6 to 9, that would give you -1 dice and so on. And then that way, jumping down is consistent for both moving around the board and with diving charge. At the moment, this weird desync between the two I don't quite like. Only get the +1 injury dice if it's a melee attack. Previously, you'd get that +1 injury dice even with ranged attacks. And with charging being restricted to targets you can see now, this does feel like a nice little melee combat lost something, being able to charge things you can't see, and ranged combat also lost something, which is that +1 dice to injury against targets that are down. So that was I think that's a nice little tweak. Especially, it just helps. Like if you're downing a lot of if you're keeping down half an enemy warband that's trying to get into combat with you, that is severely disrupting their movement up the board. So I don't think they needed the double down there. Where melee combat should always, in my opinion, feel very visceral, very quick, and like when things go bad, they go bad quickly, and this allows that to have that very compounding effect of getting someone down in melee combat. Another change was, of course, for down results. If you're taken down during your activation, it ends immediately, and that always did bug me before. The mechanics for standing up if you went down during your activation just always felt clunky to read. where yeah, and being a previous Blood Bowl player, where in Blood Bowl if a model falls down, your activation, you had a turnover, so end of turn. Yeah, this now lines up with that, and my brain is very pleased with that. But it just makes sense. Like if you go down during your own activation, like you fail a jump test and then roll it down or something, yeah, you've lost the momentum of your turn. So I do quite like that. And as well now, if a model starts down at the start of its activation, it just immediately stands up. It's no longer a choice. It was a bit weird before that it was. There wasn't really much of a purpose to staying down other than some glorious deeds. When it comes to showing models that are down, just use markers, people. Considering the rules here say that you should have the middle of the model when you lie it down be the same as where the middle of the base was located. That just seems so, I don't know, that feels very clunky and silly. Just make it, just put down a token. It's going to be much quicker. It's not going to have weird shenanigans of, I knocked your model down and then you stood it up, an inch to the left or right for some kind of favor advantage. Especially if you're not playing with people you know, markers are just going to be so much easier to use. Shaken Warbands is now just in the core rules. It's not an optional rule like it was in 1.63, and I think that's fantastic. My only somewhat criticism of the Shaken Warband in general is because the game only is played over 4 turns. If you don't manage to get your opponent to take a morale test until turn 4, you can't actually get them to flee the battlefield, which I'm a bit of two minds of. It is kind of nice, it being hard to break your opponent's warband. It means you are incentivized to play the objective rather than just trying to wipe your opponent out. Yeah, and of course, you always have the option, if you fail that first morale test, you can just do a sounding the retreat and choose to take your models off the board rather than becoming shaken. The only other change I would like to see here would be if you get down to less than, or maybe even just make it 25% of your warband, you can just choose to fail the morale test outright. So you get the first thresholds. If you fail the test, you can choose to flee instead of becoming shaken. And then once you get down to only 25% of your warband remaining, then you can just pick your toys up and go. And that's just at that point. If you're down to only 25% of your starting warband, particularly if your opponent is, if you've had a pretty bad game, your opponent still got over half their warband, there's a good chance you do just want to cut your losses, particularly in a campaign game, of course. And then to help mitigate the feels bads of me pulling my warband when my opponent still might be able to complete a glorious deed, I'd say for every glorious deed that wasn't on some kind of a timer to be completed, not that I can think of any that really have that at the moment, but any you put in some criteria, and it might just be for any uncompleted glorious deed, you get to roll the opponent who did not flee, so the one who's still in the field, gets to roll a dice for each one, and if they roll a 6, they get the glorious deed, and they get +1 to this roll for every remaining turn still left in the game. So if my warband flees at the end of turn 2, and it's a 4-turn game, there'd be rounds 3 and 4 left, so my opponent would actually get +2 to that roll to get those glorious deeds. And that's just kind of represent, like, it's pretty glorious when you manage to break your opponent and they're no longer on the battlefield. But they're not guaranteed either, so it's you're still better off actually completing them than trying to break your opponent where possible. But yeah, that just helps mitigate your opponent feeling like getting absolutely crushed and potentially denying you the ability to complete those glorious deeds. The keywords, and there are a bunch of keywords added, and overall I'm a big fan of it. Consolidating rules into the main rules is always my preference. I'd rather have a bit of a bulky rule set in the core rules than having to read the same text on multiple models. Just like I want to be able to go, infiltrator, I know what that does. I don't need to read it on every single model. But yeah, the big one that was added that one of my favorite changes to the game going into 1.0 was reload. The big two that have it that I've enjoyed seeing it on is the machine gun and the artillery witch. two weapons that I never was a big fan of being able to play peekaboo, where you move out, take your shot, and then make a dash move to hide again. This gives those weapons, particularly the machine gun, where like you do have to reload it, or like because you're firing 3 shots with it, it takes time. Like it gives it a bit more weight and makes it feel like how it should, especially when like your strong models were otherwise so maneuverable with the machine gun. And in the case of the artillery witch, in my mind, the artillery witch is there summoning the hell bomb, like pulling it out of nowhere effectively, out of a portal, or just, you know, manifesting it from hell and then throwing it, and that in my brain takes time. So yeah, that keeps the artillery witches in check because they are very powerful models. Being able to get anything that allows you to do count 3 dice on the injury roll, like the sort of Mela, some of Court, and so on, or Bloodbath, anything that allows you to do that 3d6 is very powerful in this game. So the artillery witch having to stay there and take shots back, especially where they have fly, they've got 6 move, they can move and shoot. So you should be able to get them to some cover, keep them at long range. So they're already going to be hard targets to take out, but now with the reload, they have to stand there and actually be open to taking a shot back. I do like the cleanup of the keyword here. With the blast, you can't target under a mole's base. If you're targeting under a mole's base, that is, you're targeting the model. And just because it's always going to be a little tricky to measure from any point of a model. Like, it's not even that easy to measure from the center of a model, but at least you and your opponent can both have the same understanding. The center of the model, and it's a bit easier to check. Where you're going, oh no, I'm trying to measure under their left foot, like trying to get the tape measure around that, or it just starts getting very fiddly. I like this just being nice and clean. You only have line of sight to there. Yeah, cleaning up the fire team, that's a good one. From memory, there isn't anything else too game changing. So yeah, the last thing that I wanted to have a look at is the House of Wisdom's community FAQ. So they've done an immense amount of work here, pulling all spending a lot of time on the Discord and seeing what questions are being asked regularly and what are the answers. They have the PDF you can download, but and on here on the site, it is nice and clear, seeing where blue, it's very clear in the rule book. Realistically, the people asking these questions misunderstood the rules or just didn't misread something, because it is clear in the rule book in those cases. Yeah, green is a bit more, because yeah, it's you need to get context elsewhere in the book typically. Yeah, and the C ones here, these are the ones where they think we've got it right, but is it? We'll really do need yeah, this is everyone just coming to a consensus, really. And the red ones, yeah, who knows? These rules are not amazingly written at the moment, and we need clarifications on ideally sooner rather than later. So yeah, this first one is talking about moving if you already start in combat with someone. And the big part to remember is when you move in combat, you cannot move to be within 1 inch of a new enemy model, which I don't really like. I wish you could, but at the moment, unless it's a charge move, which you can't make a charge move if you're already within 1 inch of someone, you can't do it, which does stop some shenanigans happening. But yeah, I do wish you could, especially now with the fact you can't make a melee attack and then charge someone else and make a melee attack. It all has to be done in the one instance. I do wish you could use that movement if you're within 1 inch of someone to enter 1 inch of someone else. And what I particularly do like about that is it does anything where it puts pressure on your opponent to activate models in a certain order. I like. And in this case, if your opponent can see I can pivot around and tag another model in melee combat, they might have to activate a model earlier than they otherwise would have. So yeah, just cleaning up all the greens are just the cleanup. And is that the question just clearing up how the multiple enemies work. And this one, it took me a little bit to actually find in the rulebook where it does talk about how it works because it no longer is its own section. But yeah, this is where I actually first learned how it works in the current edition or version. So yeah, this one is interesting about how it works. I do think the way with all four of the examples, I would be happy with my opponent. Actually, no, sorry, I wouldn't be happy with number 4 because the center of that curve is about there. I'd say if the model's head is above that, so they can see there, so you can. But yeah, that's something I would like them to clean up because at the moment it is a bit, especially where the model's head height, even if you're using official models, depending on how you did your basing, your model could be that 5 mils taller. And if you know, so in the real extreme, if you're going somewhere and you know how tall the trench is going to be, sticking up that bit higher might actually be a strategy so that you can peek and get the blasts where you want them while remaining a bit more concealed yourself. But yeah, targeting vertical and angles, that's fine to me. I think that's perfectly reasonable. The next example though is then, yeah, how does it work in this scenario where if you're shooting onto a corner, is it everything around that? And yeah, I think example 3 is my preferred option. It's a bit tedious, but yeah. That said, in that case, model Y here can see model B, which means model B could just be a target for the blast under the current rules. So I think you don't even... It's almost a combination of two when you're further back, and then when you're getting closer, you can see the enemy model, thus you target them. You don't need to worry about doing these weird angles that are going to be a nightmare to measure. I'm always... Generally, with rules, I want them to be clear and quick to play, particularly quick to play actually, which as much as I would love to have like scatter weapons in this using a scatter dice are slow and they cause arguments, where the current system where your opponent gets to choose the direction is relatively quick and clean, and generally most time you can be like, it's scattered 3 inches, it's a 2-inch blast, it's not hitting anything most of the time. So yeah, but yeah, it is something that the rules are not clear on at the moment. And the reason why I'm happy with 2 in particular is it would be very difficult to actually put a blast on the exact corner. Like, if it's in half a meter, the blast is, if we're looking at realism, or even not even half a meter, like quarter of a meter in, the blast isn't going to have the same force going down the bottom as it would if it was right on that corner. Because at the moment, it's assuming it goes off right on that real peak. And yeah, for option 1. So I like 2, and then when you can see any part of the model, then you can target that model. You don't need to see a model's base to be able to target them. Yeah, so at the moment there is a bit of confusion around how champions should work. There's not much to commentate there other than we really need Factory Fortress to give us a update on that. And that's what a lot more of this actually is from memory. There isn't a huge amount that is super interesting in my opinion. Yeah, more on the blast. Blast has a lot of questions at the moment. Yeah, what happens when the target point of a blast attack scatters across a ledge, overwrites obstacles and such due to the scatter keyword? And yeah, as you can see at the moment, there are quite a lot of interpretations of how this should work. Yeah. And the one just, Factory Fortress, we do need a clarification on it. But yeah, hope that was mostly a coherent rant on a bunch of different topics. If you haven't already, definitely go check out the House of Wisdom's community FAQ. It is a really good resource, and the people who put the time into that have done the community a great service. I'm really hoping Thomas and the team over at Factory Fortress are using this as a reference for what they should be addressing in the next FAQ, because that's what's come out of the community. The community has taken the time to ask those questions and try to answer them as best they can. That's where I really want to see that time focused. And then with the next update, which will be in April, I believe, is when they've said in that twice yearly. Yeah, April and October, the twice yearly updates. I really hope, we see all the things in the community FAQ addressed, along with getting that rules commentary. There's an event coming up in May here in Australia, over in Melbourne, that I'm hoping to get to, being run at ArcFest, which Thomas Piron will actually be at. So yeah, if there's anything not addressed from the community FAQ, I'll be sure to ask him. But yeah, it'd be really nice to have all those things updated before what will most likely be the first major tournament here in Australia. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed, and make sure you paint those miniatures. Catch ya.